I did something counterintuitive, and I only did it because a therapist said I should. Otherwise, there's not a chance that I would have. And in hindsight, it saved me. So what I'm going to say is going to sound odd.
Ooh. Welcome to the Future of Caregiving, the podcast where tomorrow's care meets today's voices.
Dr. Alexis
Senator Gail
is a board-certified
neuropsychologist,
medicine at Harvard
over 20,000 patients.
Award-winning Alzheimer's and
distinguished palliative care physician at Mass General Hospital.
Join us as we explore how innovation and compassion are reshaping caregiving's landscape. Hi everybody, my name is Nirvana and I am here with our wonderful guest today. Miss Debbie Weiss is here with us from New Jersey. Thank you so much for being here, Miss Debbie.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. We have a celebrity in the house today, as she was just recently on the Kelly Clarkson show back in November for National Caregivers Month. So let's just see what she had to say to Miss Kelly Clarkson.
A new book, on second thought, maybe I can. Let's get Debbie in here, everybody. Give it up for Debbie. Hi, Debbie.
Hi, Kelly.
Well, thank you for joining us. And I just have to say, you've been a caregiver your whole life, right?
My whole life, you said it, 40 years. I was thrust into caregiving when I was 17, when my father at 46 had a massive stroke, became permanently disabled, and soon afterwards my parents divorced and I became his primary caregiver for the next 30 years.
All right. Yeah, like you said, you've been a caregiver for your whole life. I would really love to hear first a little bit about your caregiving experience and sort of your journey through life. And also, I would love to know what it was like to be on a national show and how it felt to connect with so many caregivers nationwide and allow them to know that they're not alone.
Okay, that's a lot of questions. So I'll start with my caregiving experience. As you heard, I did become my dad's caregiver when I was 17, and he lived for 30 years, so I was his caregiver for the next 30 years of his life. He never lived with me, but I was his person, figuring out his money and his doctors and his everything, taking him places and moving him when we needed to move him for one reason or another. Mm-hmm. And then my dad was still alive when my oldest son was diagnosed on the autistic spectrum at 2. Mm-hmm. And all us parents are caregivers, but when you have a child with special needs, it really takes it to a different degree. I became a mama bear warrior for many years. Yeah. I guess I still am. And then my husband became permanently disabled about 5 years ago, and he struggled with both mental and physical illness, which was very difficult. And then out of the blue, unrelated to any of his other diseases, he was diagnosed with a terminal blood cancer in June of 22, and he passed away 6 months later. And I was his caregiver.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking. I'm so sorry to hear that. You truly are not just a mama bear warrior, just a warrior all around.
Yeah, it's funny what life throws at you, right?
You are a mom, a daughter, a wife, a caregiver, a case manager, a transportation, like a nutrition consultant. You're everything all in one for many different people, and you still are doing it, so kudos to you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
But yeah, what was it like to be on a national podcast?
Gosh, I only watched it once. So to watch it and listen to it again, it almost brought back, I still am looking like in amazement, to be honest with you. One, I feel like it was an incredible honor. I knew that the show was broadcast at different times in different locations, but I had in my head that it was going to be just later than my time. And a few hours before it aired in Eastern time, I started getting these messages from strangers, and, like on Instagram, and I was like, wait a second, I don't understand. How do they know? And then I realized that they had already seen the show. And I have to tell you, when I read those first couple of messages, that were from other caregivers and thanking me for sharing my story and for talking about the struggle, I just started crying because, my hope is that I reach other people. And when you're in these venues, so to speak, and you're sitting in your own house, just like I was with Kelly, it's hard to understand that other people are really listening to you, and what I say is affecting them in some way. So it was overwhelming emotionally.
I bet. Also, at the same time, I feel like it highlights the importance of support groups and having like a support system of people who are kind of going through similar things that you are during a time like that. So it's good to see that there's unity in numbers. So
Absolutely. I'm a huge proponent of support groups. I have to say that different types of support groups have really helped me through difficult times. And there's nothing like talking to someone who just gets it.
Yep, 100%. Regarding any and everything in life.
Yeah.
You're finally like, I feel heard. Like, it's not just me going through this experience. So yeah, absolutely. What would you say is, kind of on a more positive note, the most rewarding aspect of caregiving?
Knowing that you're helping someone, and that you're there. I often thought to myself, what happens to those people who don't have someone in their corner? Because in all of my different caregiving experiences, and they have been completely different, but the common thread was that I had to be there to advocate for each one of them in different ways.
Absolutely.
And I'm, honored that I was able to do that. But really, that really is what goes through my head. What happens to those who don't have someone?
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. People who don't have a voice themselves, and there's no one there to advocate for you. Gosh, it's just difficult. It's a difficult thing to go through all around, I bet. And we all know that with being a caregiver, there's lots and lots of burnout as well, rightfully so. So is there any advice that you would have for someone who's facing caregiver burnout right now?
Absolutely. I was facing that for so many years. And quite frankly, back then, I didn't even know there was a name for burnout. I didn't even understand that I was a caregiver.
Yeah.
Family caregivers were it wasn't a common phrase that people used. Mm-hmm. And when I was able to kind of put a title to it, it felt better. But what I found is that for so many years that I was caregiving, 30 years, I never took the time for myself. Every ounce of energy that I had went into other people. And besides my caregiving, right? I've always had to work, run a household, all of those kinds of things. And then I was volunteering. I was overextending myself and not realizing the importance of self-care. And I had kind of like a finite definition of self-care in my mind, that was going to a spa or, those things. And yeah, okay, that can be part of it, but it is so much more than that.
Absolutely.
And, that is definitely the antidote to burnout, because you're able to, like they say, refill your cup, but it's true. And then you're able to manage, because when I wasn't doing that, what I found was I was quick to anger. I was exhausted. I was resentful.
Yeah. Like you said, you can't pour from an empty cup. Like, if you don't take care of yourself, then who's going to take care of your loved one, Maybe let's talk about a time where you felt like you were truly challenged, and how did you overcome it? Do you have any advice for people who are going through challenges right now and they just feel like, this is a dead end? What would you say for them to do, and what methods to try?
Oh, I felt like that many times. But what comes to my mind is the more recent with my husband. I did something counterintuitive, and I only did it because a therapist said I should. Otherwise, there's not a chance that I would have. And in hindsight, it saved me. So what I'm going to say is going to sound odd. Try something new.
Ooh, okay.
So at the time when my husband was diagnosed, I was considering writing a book. I had never had any interest. I'm not like an English words person. That's not my background. I'm a numbers girl. And a little voice kept coming up for whatever reason that I should write a book. And I met a woman who helped first-time authors get their stories out there, because I didn't know anything about it. And she was just launching a 12-week course. at the same time that my husband was diagnosed with cancer.
Look at the odds.
Right. And I kept thinking like it was nudging me. And at the time I was seeing a therapist, and I'll never forget, I went to the therapist and I was already making excuses. I'm like, I know this is ridiculous. I should never do this. I'm embarrassed that I'm even thinking about it at a time like this. And, I know I should wait until this is behind us. And she said, I disagree. She said, you need something just for you that's separate. I mean, it was a challenge to do this, something that I knew nothing about and didn't really feel capable of doing. But in another way, it kept me going because it was kind of exciting, right? I mean, I don't know how to write. And when I wrote one chapter and I wrote another, and it's like it starts to build up steam and you build your confidence, and it's exciting. It's something else to look forward to.
Absolutely. It's something new. Like you just said, trying something new,
Trying something new. And look, it might not work, whatever that new thing is, right? I mean, I've tried many things that weren't for me, but you don't know until you try. And it just gives you a spark.
That's really beautiful to hear. And I think that a lot of listeners at home need to hear these words that you're saying too, just because they're always putting themselves last. And it's like, even if you're not putting yourself first every single minute of the day, it's important to do it periodically and make sure that you are doing the same thing you're doing for others, for yourself as well. Do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about your book? I'd love to hear a little bit more.
Sure. So it's a memoir. It's my memoir, and it is, of course, there's caregiving in it because it's about my life, but there's a lot of different themes. But the main theme is that I grew up, as many, many, many of us do, with these limiting beliefs that I'm always being judged, I'm not good enough. I have 3 parts of the book. So the first part is our stories about what gave me those limiting beliefs. And then the second part is how almost I was forced to start overcoming them. And looking back, honestly, becoming a caregiver for my dad was the beginning of me being able to overcome my limiting beliefs. Because I was always afraid of being judged, I tried not to be hurt. But when my dad got sick and I became his advocate, there was something different in me that said, okay, I might not want to be seen or heard or judged for me, but there's no way that I'm allowing that fear to stop me from doing what my dad needs me to do.
Absolutely. Wow.
So there's stories about that part of my life where I felt that all of these quote unquote hard things were happening to me when I looked out and I felt like it wasn't the same for my friends. Yeah. And, I had that victim mentality of why me? Why is this? I'm a good person. Why is all this happening to me? Why can't something good, why can't it be like the other person? And then when I was 50, and this is the third part of the book, when I turned 50, I kind of had an aha moment. I said to myself, 50? Yikes. If something were to happen to me now, would I be looking back on my life with regret? And I could honestly say that I would have. Not regret for my caregiving, but regret because I gave up myself. I lost myself in all my caregiving, in all my other trials and tribulations. And that shouldn't happen and doesn't need to happen. And so the third part is stories about how I started to transform and overcome those limiting beliefs.
Did you feel like you were kind of making these self-revelations as you were writing the book as well?
Sometimes. I mean, I've heard people say how therapeutic it is. And I thought, oh, that's ridiculous. But, well, first when I was writing some of those stories about my hard times in my life, in order to hopefully make it enjoyable and draw the reader in, I had to really put myself back in those situations and think about how I was feeling. So it was a kind of cathartic to go through that again. I mean, I had definite days where I wrote and I cried.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was also interesting then to look and and kind of be able to say, wow, look what you've done. You know, I don't ever stop and do that. I think most people have a hard time really giving themselves credit.
Yeah. That's
So it was helpful.
I just know that's going to resonate with so many different people, and you're spoken like a true servant at heart, honestly. Like you're such an inspiration to me personally and to honestly all of the caregivers out there. Part of my role here at CareYaya is that I onboard all of our new families that are hoping to join the platform and receive care. So I spend many hours a day talking to family caregivers, and I hear so much of the same sentiment of like, first of all, guilt.
Yes.
And yeah, so much guilt and just being like, I feel guilty even like considering wanting to take time for myself. And I'm like, it's heartbreaking for me to hear that, because you as a person who is doing so much and giving up so much of their self, like guilt should be the last emotion that you're feeling. But it's hard. It's hard to even like try and put yourself in that position until you are actually in that position yourself too. So I always tell them there's a reason why they tell you to put that oxygen mask on first. So I have read a lot that a lot of your work is about advocating for women and making sure that there's equality in like, all of this. I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about how, let me backtrack a little bit. Caregiving sort of disproportionately is falling on women, and women are having to quit their jobs to take care of their loved one, and that's really because the social support structures are just not quite there. So how can we do better as a society and kind of divvy up the caregiving responsibilities to help women and like make sure that women aren't the only ones that in which these responsibilities are falling on?
It's so difficult because when I think about my own caregiving, would I want somebody else to have been the primary caregiver? No.
Right.
Right. And I think that even though it's so much, I so relate to that guilt because, you think to yourself, I don't want to do this, or this is too difficult, or I don't have any time for myself. And this is kind of suffocating. It can be suffocating. But yet on the flip side, if I said, okay, I can give over this caregiving responsibility to my brother, let's say, I would be like, oh, he's not doing it right. Oh, he's not thinking of everything. So, I mean, I don't know if that resonates with other people, but in all honesty, that's how I feel. However, there's no reason why I can't have breaks. And I think finding the time for the breaks, the money thing is a very big problem. And, there's a bill out there, to get a tax credit. Hopefully it gets signed for family caregivers. And I think that it's great that this issue is now being talked about. I was very lucky in that I'm self-employed. And so even though I had to do things in my business, I wasn't going to lose my job. And so I constantly am grateful for that. I think our society has to, just like you give maternity leave and now paternity leave, right? All of those kinds of options need to be built in for caregivers.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think the number is over 53 million Americans taking care of either an elderly like parent, a sick spouse, or a medically vulnerable child. So I think that's about 1 in 6 Americans, which is like a lot of people.
Absolutely.
So definitely when you're walking down the street, 1/6 of the people that you're seeing are probably taking care of somebody, and they're not getting the support that they need. We really need to put these social structures into place to allow people to A, take some time for themselves, and B, be fairly treated and compensated for all of the hard work that they're putting in. And so I'm glad that finally something is being done. It took a while, but I guess some places, some businesses and stuff cover childcare, I believe, for their employees. And I really think the next step absolutely has to be like elder care as well, or not necessarily just elder care, but disability care or anybody that you're taking care of.
Yeah. And like I said, if you look back, even though it's frustrating now, we are moving in the right direction. Just, these kinds of things just take years and years, unfortunately.
Absolutely, yeah. Yep, sure does. We were talking a little bit about finances and financially like preparing yourself and stuff. So I have a couple of questions for you in that regard. So I'm wondering, how does one effectively financially prepare themselves after a loved one has passed? Do you have any advice for people at home regarding that?
It's so funny that you're asking me this question, and I'll tell you why. So, my first career, I was a CPA for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And now, the last almost 30 years, I've been an insurance agent.
Oh, awesome.
And so I have always, and I've had my money troubles, believe me. I write about it in the book.
Yeah.
And for me, since that's been my life, has to do with money and understanding that, I forget how many people are then put in the situation. If they become a caregiver and their spouse, let's say, was the one who handled the money, or they're a widow and they've never been the one to handle the money, how stressful that can be.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that caregiving, and I have to say, with my son, I spent money I didn't have because I just felt like back then insurance was not covering anything really. And I just didn't care. And this was my choice, right? Nothing, I didn't have to do this, but I just felt when he was such a young age, I wanted to throw every therapy, at the wall. And it cost a lot of money. And then that got me into a lot of debt. And then it kind of just snowballed. So I want to say, whatever your financial situation is, whatever your amount of financial knowledge is, you are not alone. I think it is very important to not kind of drown in this by yourself, but to find somebody, whether it's a loved one, but sometimes you don't feel comfortable sharing that information, and I know firsthand, with someone close to you.
Talking about money is tough.
Talking about money is tough. And what's funny is that you're asking me this. I actually, just in the last 48 hours, have been thinking, boy, could I be of service to caregivers and or widows who don't have the knowledge, and be able to coach them and teach them.
Yeah.
Because sometimes an outsider, it's just more comfortable. And somebody who's been there too is always
absolutely
good.
I mean, like I said, I'm talking to handfuls and handfuls of these people on a day-to-day basis, and I'm sure they would love to have a resource like yourself. So if you would ever like to, come on to a webinar for our families and give them an opportunity to maybe ask you some questions and, share their experiences and stuff, we would be more than happy to have you. I'm sure they would absolutely love the expertise. And
Well, thank you. I would absolutely love to do that. That would be great.
that would be a wonderful, wonderful situation. I have another question as well that's maybe more on the difficult side too, and it's about sort of preparing yourself for the death of a loved one. And I feel like that's something that as a society we don't necessarily talk about enough. So I'm wondering, what did you wish you knew that you know now to prepare yourself for both caregiving in general and also for preparing yourself for the death of a loved one?
So it's a great question asking me about preparing for the death of a loved one, because I spent so much time, my husband's doctor would not, I was pressing her, give me a time frame. I just want to know, I just wanted to know.
Right.
And she wouldn't. And of course, nowadays I'm going down the Google rabbit hole and I'm making my own inferences from his blood work and his, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And this not knowing I found very, very hard.
Mm-hmm.
I would think often about what it was going to feel like. How was it going to happen? Would he suffer greatly, more than he was? That unknown was so scary. And I feel like for me, now let me just say, my husband also suffered with mental illness, and it changes a person's personality. So it was very difficult dealing with him. And so because of that, often I lost my patience because he really was not nice to me.
Right.
But of course, in hindsight, just like always, and I really tried, I needed, and I would say as much as you can, appreciate the time that you have. Instead of, like, I was in my head, what's going to happen, what's going to happen, what's going to happen. And I was a little bit more about what I needed to do for him instead of maybe emotionally connecting with him. Again, because of his mental illness, it was very difficult to do that. But I would say to focus on that and appreciate the time you have. Now, the hard thing is that he was miserable. And on one hand, you're feeling very guilty because you're hoping that it ends, because you don't want to see someone suffer, right? But then you feel guilty because what are you saying, that you wish that they would die? I mean, it's a horrible, horrible, competing thoughts. And the minute that it happens, you wish they were back. And I don't think that you can really prepare yourself for that feeling.
Yeah.
I think the ways that I did, honestly, I did start thinking about some financial things ahead of time, that maybe I could do something that would help, or that I would be prepared at the time, or getting your own stuff in order. It's a time where you start thinking about it. That's the kind of person that I am. I wanted to know, well, what was I going to do for the funeral arrangements? It's not something that I had dealt with it before for my father, but it was a little bit different because there was a family plot and all of this. So, I got those things in order, even though it's uncomfortable, ahead of time, so that when it does happen, there weren't major decisions at the time. I knew who I was going to call. I knew, and it's something you don't want to think about. But I think honestly now we should all be thinking about it, because it's going to happen to all of us eventually. Yeah. So why not?
You honestly got me a little choked up there. I have chills going up and down my arms. But I mean, it's sort of in a situation where you feel like you have absolutely no control. You kind of want to try and get a little bit of that control back by sort of knowing, what's going on. What can I do? Like, when is this going to happen? And just like the not knowing part, I feel like is really contributing to like the stress and the anxiety of it. So I guess that's really helpful advice, to just like sort of do the things that you can do and try and like let the other stuff like happen as they happen, and take every day as it comes. And
absolutely.
Yeah. A lot of our listeners have loved ones with, Alzheimer's, dementia, and different cognitive impairments. So it's definitely something that will resonate with them. And it's always remember that it's the disease talking. It's not your loved one, I guess. So just remember that you're not dealing with the same person that you've loved your entire life. So that's a really, really important thing to take note of as well. Do you wish that there were anything in place to help support you during this time? Like, what is something that you wish was just like readily available to family caregivers to have whenever they just needed to like get away, or like any like societal things?
Maybe a hotline.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I mean, it just came to me as you're saying it, to just be able to pick up the phone and be like, oh my gosh, I just need to talk to somebody about this, and this is happening, and this is how I feel. Again, with the family members, you don't want to, it's not comfortable to say, I feel guilty, I'm thinking about them dying. It might be hard, just like it's hard to talk about money. So it'd be nice to be able to pick up the phone and just talk to somebody else who gets it. A fellow caregiver who's been there.
The automatic support group. You don't have to wait for every week to come to talk.
Exactly.
Pick up the phone and be like, I need a vent. You ready for this?
Yes.
Yeah, that's honestly a fantastic idea. I will go talk to our technology guy right after this and see if he has any thoughts and ideas on how we can implement this, because it definitely feels like something that many people would be able to benefit from, and just like get that weight off their chest, for even if it's just a minute.
Yeah, because it does make all the difference, right? I mean, it's like anything. When we talk about it and we share it, it's like you can take a deep breath.
Absolutely. Do you want to share with us a little bit about how we can purchase your book online?
Absolutely. I appreciate that. So all the usual online places, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and my website is probably the best because then you don't have to go searching for it. It'll take you right there. And my website is DebbieRWeiss.com. The R is important. Otherwise, you get a realtor in California.
Oh, no.
And fun fact, there's another Debbie Weiss
Ooh.
in California who's a widow who wrote a book.
So there's 3 of you guys?
Yeah, well, there's more than 3, but the realtor, she doesn't count because she's not in the same, I guess obviously not a fairly common name, but the woman in California, we have had interviews and people have mixed us up and thought they were meeting the other person.
Oh, wow. That's what is her book called?
I don't know the name of her book, but I'll tell you a quick funny story. One day I was being interviewed on a radio show, and we actually weren't on camera. We were on a phone, and there were 2 co-hosts that weren't in the same location. And this was 6 months after my husband died. And they asked me a question. We were probably halfway in, and I answered the question, and then it was a commercial break. And one of the co-hosts said to me, "You're already dating and your husband died 6 months ago?" I said, "What are you talking about?" "No, I'm not dating." Well, the other Debbie Weiss wrote a book about dating after being a widow because she has been a widow for 10 years. So that's what her book is about.
Ah, yeah, they entirely got it mixed up.
Yep.
That's oh no. Well, I know that I have ordered my book off your website, and I'm very
Thank you.
I'm sure I'll be sharing the insights that I learn with all of the wonderful families that I interact with on a daily basis. And yeah, any last minute thoughts, finishing comments, any tidbit to have the caregivers leave with?
So a quote that I talk about it in my book, that I've never been a person who, had a specific quote. Some people have a quote that they live by or that really resonates with them. And a few years ago, before I started writing my book, whatever I was doing, I read this quote that I'd read many, many times. And for the first time, I got it. And the quote is by Glinda the Good Witch from The Wizard of Oz, who said, "You've always had the power, my dear. You just had to learn it for yourself." And, when I heard that my whole life, I just thought she was telling Dorothy, you just had to click your heels and say, there's no place like home. Right. But for whatever reason that day, I thought to myself, now I get it. Each of us, every single one of us, has the power inside of us to do whatever we want. We just have to realize that we have it because we don't realize we have it.
Absolutely.
And so regardless of what your current circumstance is, it doesn't matter. You have the power to change. I'm not saying not become a caregiver, but I'm saying maybe to look at it a little bit differently, to maybe try that new thing, even though you don't think this is the right time, because I didn't. Mm-hmm. It is. Do something that lights you up because you deserve it.
Perfect time. Absolutely. If you're waiting for the right time, you're going to be waiting your whole life.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that you can share on that too, because you didn't think you were going to be a caregiver after another, and life just comes at you a certain way.
That's it.
100%. Well, I appreciate all of your wonderful insights and the time you took with us today. This was really insightful and wonderful, and I can't wait to share this episode with our listeners.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, you take care of yourself, and I hope
you
have
too.
a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you for joining Future of Caregiving. Together with CareYaya, we're transforming caregiving through compassion and innovation. Subscribe and join us, and together, let's build a better future for care.